folks, you know you're in for a treat when you hear that tune because it's time for another week of the Rec Poker Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Reed, Bluffsterini in the home game. And if you want to learn more about me and the rest of the crew, you can go to rec.poker/crew. You'll be able to hear from them in a second yourself. But first, I want to thank our sponsors, website AMP and the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. I've got the best job in the world. I get to hang out here with this revolving panel of recreational poker wizards and talk poker every week. So, revolving panel of recreational poker wizards, why don't you introduce yourselves to Rec Poker Nation?
Well, I'm Chris Jones. You can find me 5B5 on Twitter or 5x5 on PokerStars.
And I'm John Somsky. I'm Poker Geek MN everywhere.
And I'm Keith Brandt, and I'm Monkey System everywhere.
And I'm Rob Washam, and I'm Radman 50 almost everywhere.
Almost everywhere. He doesn't have the perfect suite of accounts anymore. We learned earlier. More on that behind the scenes later on Rec Poker After Dark. In the meantime, it's Monday night, so we're here. We're competing in the nightly home game. It's free. It's play money in the PokerStars client. We're stealing each other's chips. We're trying to win that bronze pin or maybe even that big boy silver pin to go brag to all our friends about it. And every night we take a forum post from the rec.poker forums and talk about it here on the air. So it's completely free to come join the forums at Rec Poker. All it takes is an email address and a smile. And I'll encourage our folks, if you're listening along, you might want to start showing up live on Monday nights as we do our chats podcast on our YouTube. We're broadcasting that live from now on. So you can come and get the scoop. Maybe some friends and guests will be handing out prizes that you can win live in the booth. Otherwise, the audio format will keep coming out every week, just like this one, the forums edition of the podcast. So this is a forum post by our own Radman50, and he's Radman50 in the Rec Poker forums. So he's got that going for him. So Rob, this is a spot. We're going to look at it here and talk about it. Let's look at some of the responses that people made. But I say, I do encourage folks to go check this out. There's some good responses here from Eric Anderson and Elvita and a couple other forum slayers who have uploaded some documents and some images that might kind of help visually describe what they're getting at. So Rob, I hate getting 3-bet. I like to be the person putting the 3-bets out there. So I already am feeling uncomfortable by the first line of this hand. What made you bring this one in, and why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, I just wanted to, talk about how we construct our pre-flop ranges, and then how do we then respond when somebody, does something like 3-bets us, right? So in this particular case, I opened from under the gun +1 8-handed table on ACR. I opened under the gun +1 to 2.5 big blinds out of a 100 big blind stack. I get called by middle position, which is fine. I'm good with that. And it folds around to the small blind, who then raises to 7 big blinds. Now, this is a 3-bet, right? And a couple of things that stand out. First of all, if I'm going to 3-bet here, I'm probably going to go to more like a 9 or 10, because we have, we're going to go like 3 times the initial raise, but then we have a caller in between. So we're going to add another, raise amount to that. So it'd be like 9 or 10. And so it comes back around to me that everybody else folds. It comes back around to me, and I decide to call it for the couple of reasons. The first reason, the 3-bet was pretty small. So to me, it indicates somebody who doesn't really take a lot of time determining what their bet sizes should be in these situations. Now, like I say, normally I would fold ace-10 offsuit to a 3-bet here. But then I looked at his stats, and his stats are quite informative. It's 43, 25, 12, almost 100 hands. So he's VPIPing 43% of the time, and he's 3-betting 12% of the time. So those are some pretty hefty stats. So what that means is that his 3-bet range could be pretty wide. So I went ahead and made the call. And then I got stuck in this hand. It was just the middle position player also called. So now we're 3 ways to a flop, and the flop is 4 of clubs, 7 of clubs, 3 of clubs, and I happen to have the ace of clubs in my hand.
Oh, boy.
So
Yep.
now it's like, oh my, where am I going? I can't go anywhere. I've got the nut flush draw.
You're handcuffed.
Yeah. So the small blind comes out and bets pot. He bets pot. So I ended up calling, which is probably my first mistake. And then the turn comes the 10 of diamonds. So now I have top pair, top kicker, right? And a nut flush draw. So I go, now where am I going? So the small blind bets half pot and is all in. And of course I call with my wonderful hand. I mean, I got top pair, top kicker, flush, nut flush draw. What else do you want? And I get a jack of spades on the river, which doesn't do anything for me. And he shows a pair of queens. So the reason I posted this is a couple of things. This was early in the tournament, and I really demolished my stack.
Mm.
I mean, I just totally went from over 100 big blinds to just down to almost nothing. And it's just like early in the tournament, should you be doing this? I mean, probably not. I mean, you should be playing a little tighter and not getting so rambunctious, I guess, with this thing. But I had it in my head that this guy's range was wide enough that I could make these plays.
Well, and you said it really well there, Rob. You're like, I've got this wonderful hand. I'm in this, I keep every street that comes, my hand gets better and better, and it's like everything about the hand is great except for the action, right? And like you said it, like they're telling you that they've got that they think they have a strong hand, but that doesn't necessarily
Yes.
mean that they actually have a strong hand on a monotone flop like this. So it's interesting because you kind of decided that because of the sizing, they're not going to be on that level where you have to, make certain assumptions about them. But then it does that kind of player, big bets, it does feel like they're kind of like saying, I have a really strong hand. So Rob, do you feel like they understood how, like, the spot that they were in? Do you think they were overplaying their queens here, or is it? I mean, I guess he's got the queen of clubs, right? So that also does make it a pretty good hand for him as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I just think that overall, like I say, the main reason I did this is whether he played it wrong or whether I played it wrong post flop. I'm thinking more on the pre flop decision I made.
Great point.
Because normally in any other situation, if I raise from middle position or under the gun, like with an ace 10 offsuit, that's almost like a bluff raise, because it's not strong enough to continue against a 3-bet. So I would normally just fold that against a 3-bet. But then I looked at his stats and I'm getting excited, I want to play, but I don't know. I'm looking for feedback from others to, how they would proceed. Now, we did get a response from Elvita. And he was saying that what we might want to do is jam the flop. When he comes out and bets pot at that point in time, why not just jam it in? I mean, you got the nut flush draw. What are you waiting for? But my thought on that is I have so many chips. Do I want to jam 100 big blinds in the middle with a draw this early in the tournament? But as it turns out, I end up calling it, all in anyway on the turn. So it's just, I don't know.
That's a
I
really
didn't take
good
advantage
point.
of my fold equity, I guess.
Yeah, that's a really good point. If you feel like it's going in anyway. Keith, do you have something to jump in there?
Yeah, the pre-flop action, I agree with totally 100% with stats like his and the fact that we're going to be in position after the flop. Uh, I would probably have done the same thing. That wasn't what I was wondering about. The one thing that I'm concerned about here is that pot size bet
Yeah.
on the flop. You with the effective stack sizes in SPR, we didn't really have the odds, even though it was to a nut flush draw. Did we have the odds to make that call?
Chris, did you have something?
I mean, so like, I think I mean, Keith, you raised a good question here, but I think you see this more and more, I think, especially, I think we're probably thinking this player is a little either loose or inexperienced based on their bet sizing on the 3-bet sizing on the pre-flop. And I see this a lot with players who I think are a little less experienced, is like they kind of go to that pot size bet in a 3-bet pot because they kind of just want to take it down. And I think they get a little bit overexcited sometimes. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're beat, but you probably are with the hand you're holding a lot. They have a lot of ace king, a lot. They'll probably do this pot size bet with some things like, I bet you could even get a king queen suited showing up that you might be ahead of, but for the most part, you're kind of behind. And one thing that the only thing here, because like honestly, I don't know what you do with when you get to this point, you've got position, you've got the nut flush draw, and it's a big bet, but I'm probably calling here too, because I can win a big pot against maybe a player who's tied to their hand at this point. But I do think pre-flop, I want to go back to this thought about these hands that we would normally throw away. And I agree with you. Like, we want to have an exploitive reason to throw them away, or to not throw them away. And with those kinds of holdings, when I have an opponent who I am deeming overly active, I have an ace blocker, and I have a very small 3-bet. This, I think, it becomes a really interesting candidate for a 4-bet, because I think you're going to not go to you're almost for sure not going to go multi-way if you 4-bet it here as a bluff. If you get jammed on or something, it's a very easy fold, and you don't run into the problem of having a dominated ace when an ace comes. There's a lot of problems that ace 10 is going to present. So the only thing that I think is that I would probably either fold or 4-bet this pre-flop. But I think once we get post-flop, I'm losing all my chips too.
I'm really curious about that point, Chris, because I think a lot about candidates to balance out a 4-bet range. Like 4-betting and 5-betting, it seems to be pretty value heavy in the games that I play. And so I'm always looking at ways to add some combos in there. They're maybe a little less value heavy, and they're typically going to be hands that have like an ace blocker in them, for instance, and a hand that I'd rather not just call and play.
And then really beautiful thing I think about ace 10 in this situation is we think our opponent is wide, but also if they're not just really terrible, like they should probably fold ace jack and probably ace queen off. And those are some really, really prime hands we would love to get rid of. So like I kind of like this in this spot, not all the time. Like this is not a slam dunk 4-bet, but when we've got a multi-way hand and a player in the small blind who we're deeming wide, and we're pretty deep stacked, so we can actually make this 4-bet and then lose less if we get jammed on than if we get into one of the situations like that we do get into. I don't know. That's just my thought.
Losing less by raising more, on an earlier street is a point that I think a lot of recreational players need to take to heart. For the same reason that it's hard to bet fold. it's hard to raise fold because we're not used to having aggressive actions with the part of our range that we're not interested in continuing in the hand with. But especially when it comes to things like blockers, that's really important. So Chris, how do I, because I struggle with this sometimes. So let's say I'm in this spot and like ace six, ace seven, ace eight, ace nine, those are also all good candidates in that way for this. So like, how do I not just find myself over bluffing or having like a four bet range that's just got, it's like, well, I've got an ace blocker. And like, is there something about ace 10 in particular that makes it good? Or is it
Well,
just a frequency thing or what?
I'm not going to find myself with a lot of those hands because we're in early position. This is
Good
this
point.
is near
Good point.
Yeah.
Good
near
point.
the bottom of my aces that I'm
Great
opening.
point.
Yes.
I might have some of the wheel aces, suited wheel aces too here, but I'm not
Yeah.
going to have ace seven very much at all.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I
That's
don't
great.
think I would even open ace nine there. You know, open ace 10 because we're in Broadway territory.
Right.
And that's the bottom of my aces that I'm opening under the gun or under the gun one. I think I don't even open until I get to the button. I'm probably not opening an ace nine or an ace eight.
I think that's a great point. So yeah, so it's actually closer to the bottom of that range than we were thinking. So that's thinking about the bottom of ranges. Before we started recording, we talked a bit about the top of ranges too. And this is something that I think we're always kind of afraid of, but does happen from time to time. Rob, we're at a point where we see this spot that's really begging for a squeeze, right? And we think, oh, this guy should be squeezing with all sorts of stuff. His range for squeezing is actually really wide. But it still contains those hands at the real top of the range, right? Like we don't actually get, we can estimate his range, but we can't say where his hand is distributed within that range. So how do we, I mean, maybe it's kind of a silly question. Like it's like, how do you play poker? But how do we kind of keep that in our mind as we get into these spots? Because I feel like we're always looking at these places where there's contradictory information. Like Andrew Brokus says, you know, don't bet back into, if you're in the condensed part of your range, don't be an aggressive player versus someone into their polarized range. And so, you know, if someone's three betting, I guess what we're saying is that this player isn't a polarized three better. So they're just a wide three better. So you're not really, those factors aren't as much tension.
Yeah, to be fair, I think I wouldn't have been surprised to see him show ace king here and have the same exact actions with maybe with the king of clubs, right? I wouldn't be surprised to see that in these types of games. So you know, maybe I'm making excuses for why I called it all the way down, but you know, and really I think if I didn't see the 10 on the turn,
right,
I don't know that I would have called the rest of those chips, even though I was getting probably a really good price by then because it was only half a pot that put him all in.
I'm
so
definitely calling.
His bet size, his bet sizing was a little weird because he bet full pot, which only left him, after I called, only left him half a pot remaining. So, you know, the whole thing screamed, you know, the bet sizing was wrong. So what is he thinking? And so I think a player like that could show up with ace, king, ace, queen in that situation. So.
Well, there's a great response from Eric Anderson, who just gets down to the meat and potatoes and says, listen, top pair, top kicker wins a lot. You're getting 27% pot odds, call half pot to win for, to call test. You're getting extremely good odds. And you've got 27% equity even against that particular range. He says there's
against that particular hand.
Against that particular
this is
hand,
Poker
yes.
Tracker, which knows the hand. So they're saying I have 27% against that hand. So what do I have against that range? Against a possible range, it's probably even more than that. It's probably in the 30s.
Having that ace of clubs helps clean up a lot of that equity for sure, because a quarter of the rivers are just death to your opponent. So that helps no matter what their hand is, basically. And then Eric goes through a bunch of different combos here, aces through jacks, ace king, ace queen, um, and he's got some other good questions here about how to calculate some of that stuff. So I encourage all our folks to go check that out. And another good response by Elvita, who I think we're going to be hearing more from. Elvita has been posting more and more in the forums and joining us in the show and in the instruction areas. So I'm looking forward to getting to know my man Joe a little better and helping all of us kind of learn poker. I learned so much talking about this kind of stuff with you guys and with our premium members. It's a great chance just to get together and talk poker with fun folks. Is there anything else on this hand that people want us to talk about? It's a good example of what we're looking at when we get into these spots and the factors that we can consider when we're considering getting a little frisky ourselves.
The only
think
other
just-
thing, oh, go ahead, Keith.
I think just talk in general, what happened here is one of the benefits of aggressive play like what this guy did.
Hmm,
It gets people to play back at you when you do have the goods.
good point. Yeah, Chris?
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, I think if you play online, this feels like a very online hand to me, an early online hand. I think especially this is probably rebuy period. I think there's a lot of people who are just putting a ton of chips in the middle, and you've got to be prepared to figure out how you're going to approach those kinds of spots, because this I think this is a very common 100 big blind online hand. We're in like a 3 or 4 hour reg period, and people are just starting to get their, they're just trying to build a stack here, and people, I think stack size is sort of a little more meaningless in these kinds of, not meaningless, but they're like meaningless to some players, right? They just are like, I'm just getting this in, or I'm going to rebuy and let's go.
That's a good point. And when I was learning poker, I really like simple rules. I still do. So I'm one of those players that's likely to just like shove every nut flush combo that I encounter, because it's fun to shove flush draws. And so when you in these monochrome flops, though, sometimes I feel like that's kind of a different game. Do you guys have any thoughts on that generally when you get to this kind of spot? Do you have like a preferred way to play that nut flush draw? Because my gut tells me if I was in the spot, I'm putting them in on the flop and hoping for the best.
It's,
You know, you guys
being
all
in
like to just
position,
think about things. You like to think about
Being-
things and make rational decisions. Okay. Yeah, good.
being in position it changes a lot of how you would handle it. If I was out of position, I probably would have check raised jam, if I would have checked to him if he would have 3-bet me from in position, I probably would have check raised jam there. But being in position, I felt like I could play it more passively because I was in position. Whereas I'd have to play it a little bit more aggressively if I was out of position. So.
And do you find that, like, by doing that, essentially what you're doing is you're kind of giving yourself a chance to fold, and you're giving your opponent a chance to get chips in with a wider range bluffing on a future street. Although I guess you remove the chance for them to call that shove, that reshove, if you were to do that. So how important is it, and last question for the group on this tonight, how important is it when you're thinking about position, whether you even want to have the ability to fold later in the hand, or whether you just know you've got the kind of hand that you're going to be calling anything anyway? You know what I mean? How do you guys decide if it's important enough to be worth the trade-off on the fold equity that you'd get from shoving instead? Yeah, it stumped me too. I don't know. Poker's
I
hard.
don't know.
Yeah, Chris?
I mean, I think I'm trying, like, I'm somewhat following your question. How do we decide, when we're just like, we're basically never folding in position? Is that the question?
Yeah, if there's a spot where you're never folding in position, like in a spot like this, essentially, where the SPR is just going to be getting smaller and smaller, you're always going to have that flush draw. I'm not, or maybe that's just not the right way of thinking about it. Like if you should always give yourself the option to fold in position, then obviously you just have to then plan on folding sometimes when those cards come or when that action.
Right. Yeah. No, I think you should always be considering, if you're continuing on in this hand with the, like, what am I going to do when, like, if we continue on here, right? We're hoping to hit a club, first of all. 10's kind of nice and ace is kind of nice. Probably our least favorite kinds of cards are kings and queens and jacks, probably, right?
Yeah.
So like, I think we want to be thinking about what are we going to do when those kinds of things happen, and if the answer is we're never folding, I mean, that's fine, but we should be thinking about that when we make the call on the flop, I think.
I think on the flop, my reasoning is that, okay, I can call this, and a lot of times you call, that person out of position is going to be checking a lot of turns. If he had a hand like ace king, ace queen, that type of hand, he's probably checking the turn because he wants to get a free card too. So two things happen: the turn's a 10,
Right.
and then he bet. So had the turn not been a 10 and he bet, I might have folded there. I would have saved myself 40 big blinds, right? I think about 38 big blinds.
Yeah.
So I think if the turn hadn't been a 10 and I saw that bet, I probably would have folded, because now I'm not getting the odds anymore, and he's showing me that he has a real hand. The fact that it came one of my cards that I was hoping to see, other than a club, it kept me in the hand.
And I guess
Yeah.
that's a great point, that if he doesn't bet, then you do get to check behind and see if that club comes and just kind of actually play the draw that way. So I guess
Yeah.
that's fun too. Yeah, Chris.
There's very few, like, honestly, the hand from our opponent's perspective, this is I think another hint that this player is not all that experienced. I don't think this shove is a very good idea. This exact hand that Rob has is like the ideal candidate for us to get called by. But other than that, it's like we're beat or we're getting just snap folds pretty much. I mean, I can't think of too much here that's, so I don't think this is a very wise move by our villain here.
Well, they can, we won't name names, but it might be you folks. Head on over to rec.poker, get a free account, and start soaking up the knowledge from the rest of the Wrecking Crew members over here. Well, I'd love to thank John and Rob and Chris and Keith. Of course, our sponsors, Website Amp and Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, and Elvita, and 7 High 11, and Eric Anderson, and you, the listeners. Talk to you soon.